Well, tonight's message is going to be taken from the book of Ezekiel, the first chapter of that book of prophecy. Ezekiel, like many of the books we've been looking at lately in our study of the minor prophets, and before that in Daniel, is a book which we could classify as apocalyptic literature. Now, apocalyptic meaning, of course, revelatory, using poetic or symbolic language to show something in a spiritual truth. And some of what we look at here in Ezekiel 1 is very much figurative. It's hard to see it as anything else, especially with some of the very strange parts of Ezekiel's vision. You may already know Ezekiel and his vision from seeing a valley of dry bones come up and walk around like they were living men and things like that. You may remember part of what we'll be reading here too, with the wheel within the wheel. We have some famous songs that reference these things, among other things. But in particular, with chapter 1, we're going to see a description of the arrival of the throne chariot of God. And the presence of the Lord is going to appear before the prophet here in this vision that will arrive in his sight. So the first thing we'll do is spend some time in the text. We'll have some comments afterwards. Starting in verse 1. In the 30th year, the 4th month, on the 5th day, while I was among the exiles by the Kibar River, the heavens were opened and I saw visions of God. On the 5th of the month, it was the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiakim. The word of the Lord came to Ezekiel, the priest, the son of Buzi, by the Kibar River in the land of the Babylonians. There the hand of the Lord was upon me. I looked and I saw a windstorm coming out of the north, an immense cloud with flashing lightning and surrounded by brilliant light. The center of the fire looked like glowing metal, and in the fire was what looked like 4 living creatures. In appearance, their form was like that of a man, but each of them had 4 faces and 4 wings. The legs were straight, their feet were like those of a calf, and gleamed like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had the hands of a man. All 4 of them had faces and wings, and their wings touched one another. Each one went straight ahead. They did not turn as they moved. Their faces looked like this. Each of the 4 had the face of a man. On the right side, each had the face of a lion, and on the left, the face of an ox. Each also had the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. Their wings were spread out upward. Each had 2 wings, one touching the wing of another creature on either side, and 2 wings covering its body. Each one went straight ahead, where the Spirit would go. They would go, without turning as they went. The appearance of the living creatures was like burning coals of fire or like torches. Fire moved back and forth among the creatures. It was bright, and lightning flashed out of it. And the creatures sped back and forth like flashes of lightning. As I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the ground beside each creature with its 4 faces. This was the appearance and the structure of the wheels. They sparkled like chrysolites, and all 4 looked alike. Each appeared to be made like a wheel intersecting a wheel. As they moved, they would go in any one of the 4 directions that the creatures faced. The wheels did not turn about as the creatures went. Their rims were high and awesome, and all 4 rims were full of eyes all around. And when the living creatures moved, the wheels beside them moved. And when the living creatures rose from the ground, the wheels also rose. Wherever the Spirit would go, they would go, and the wheels would rise along with them, because the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. And when the creatures moved, they also moved. When the creatures stood still, they also stood still. And when the creatures rose from the ground, the wheels rose along with them, because the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. So far, we've basically seen what is motivating this chariot. We actually haven't seen the carriage that God is going to be upon. We've basically just seen these living creatures which effectively act like motors moving these wheels around that are compelling this carriage that as bringing the Lord into Ezekiel's vision. And in and of themselves, they're a pretty awesome and pretty unusual sight. Their scale, however, has not been fully established here. Now remember what we've read so far. These things are so big that their wings reach out and touch each other, and they're holding up this, what we're about to read about. And now we're going to kind of see as we read just exactly the sort of scale, the real relative size between Ezekiel and these creatures, and as his vision goes on. Spread out above the heads of the living creatures was what looked like an expanse, sparkling like ice and awesome. Under the expanse, their wings were stretched out one toward the other. Each had 2 wings covering its body. And when the creatures moved, I heard the roar of their wings, like the roar of rushing waters, like the voice of the Almighty, like the tumult of an army. And when they stood still, they lowered their wings. Then there came a voice from above the expanse over their heads as they stood and lowered their wings. Above the expanse, over their heads, was what looked like a throne of sapphire, and high above on the throne was a figure like that of a man. I saw what appeared to be his waist up. He looked like glowing metal, as if full of fire, and from there down he looked like fire, and brilliant light surrounded him. Like the appearance of a rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, so was the radiance around him. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord, and when I saw it, I fell face down, and I heard the voice of one speaking. So the word there that really tells us how big that was and how big we should understand it to be is expanse. Expanse is a word that we can see translated differently in other places, and it's very closely related to the word firmament, which you may remember from the Old Testament in Genesis as being the description of the sky above the world as the firmament. It's a sort of a poetic term, seeing not the sky beyond the sky, right, where the stars are, but the expanse where the clouds and the heavens are here. So basically, when we see this word expanse, what we're seeing is the entire sky, for all intents and purposes, has been filled with this chariot that is bringing the presence of the Lord. So if you can imagine being outside and looking up, and no matter how far you turn your head this way, and no matter how far you turn your head this way, you're still seeing that chariot in your vision. And no matter how far you look behind you and how far you look forward, the whole sky is just taken up by one object. That is the vision the scale we're looking at here. Now underneath that massive expanse of the entire sky, there are 4 creatures holding that up. And on top of that is the occupant of that throne, the presence of the Lord. And he's glowing like the sun, essentially, like fire and lightning above this firmament. And in that picture, we can see just how cosmic, how gigantic, how unfathomably big the Lord would be in that particular picture. God is intended to be, in all of his depictions in the Bible, awe-inspiring. But here, he being represented visually is just intimidating in his mere presence. I don't think any of us can really picture how much material would be needed to make something that big. I mean, if you wanted to make something to cover the entire sky, how much weight would that be? How much material would you have to have just so that Earth's gravity wouldn't buckle it and send it crashing down? I mean, we have a hard enough time keeping buildings up during an earthquake. Just imagine having the entirety of the sky trying to be covered by a man-made structure. It's really basically impossible for us to try and imagine, although I imagine someone who's better at math than me could calculate how much engineering would be needed to cover the sky with one big piece of crystal. Regardless of the realism of this image, or whether or not it would be practical for people to do it, that kind of brings more into focus just exactly how awe-inspiring and miraculous this ought to be. It should be very, very overwhelming for us. But having this picture of God in mind, let's now pull back and think about it again. Would this picture of God actually show his entirety, his fullness, the complete picture of his presence? Can God really be wrapped up in such a small package as a giant figure in the sky? I think if we think about God's role in creation and in the way we understand his interactions with the world, God isn't merely just a man in the sky on a throne. God instead, being represented in that way, has only shown the prophet a tiny glimpse of what God really is like. Now remember what God said to Moses. He said, Moses, I want you to see me like you've asked, but I can't show you my face. So in order for you to survive, I'm going to let you look at my back as I walk past you. That was all Moses was able to see. And even that, when Moses walked away from seeing that particular portion of a vision of the Lord, his face was glowing with the radiance of the presence of the glory of it. So much so that the people couldn't stand to look at Moses, who was merely reflecting God. So if the creator and sustainer of all life, who holds the entirety of his creation together with his presence and his power, and he lives and moves within it, and is in command of everything, the enormity and the expanse of God cannot be merely summed up as a big guy on a throne, sitting among the clouds, riding on top of some angels. He just gave Ezekiel a portion of a vision of what his potential is like. Final bit of perspective to wrap things up. Jesus, being God, took all of that glory and majesty, all of that power of creation, and put it to the side in order to be born as a tiny, defenseless baby in a shed behind a hotel in Palestine 2,000 years ago. He gave up all of the glory, the fame, and the power that would have come from any position he wanted. He could have been born the emperor's son. He could have just manifested fully grown if he wanted to, popped into existence like a miracle. But instead, he lived as a man and he died as we die. And in so doing, the fullness of God was able to restore the fullness of the sin of man and reconcile us to himself, so that such a great and awesome creator and sustainer of life could then also sustain our eternal life. And we are ever so grateful for that sacrifice that he made on our behalf. Well, that's our message for this evening. And in case there is any need here, we do traditionally offer an invitation message at this time.